Sfath's predictions from CR896 with ChatGPT Part 4. Plastic invention, environmental degradation, climate change denial.
Hello, ChatGPT. Can you give me examples of this? I will explain that plastic was invented in 1531 in what was then Germany from the processing of cheese as artificial horn or casein. But in the following decades, new forms and products will be invented, which in the course of a few decades will lead to a very serious and global environmental catastrophe because Earth humans will carelessly and irresponsibly throw away vast quantities of plastics in the open countryside. This will even happen at the highest altitudes of the mountains, which will be considered a prestige and a new sport when climbing them. And all the causes and effects will lead to environmental disasters that the whole of earthly humanity will find very difficult or impossible to control, because in relation to the irresponsibly ever-increasing and numerically higher growing Earth humanity, overall, everything from environmental pollution to the pollution of the entire planet, to the impairment of flora and fauna, to the destruction of the climate and the atmosphere, will become more and more extensive, precarious, dangerous, destructive, and life-destroying. And the beginning of this was laid by the already existing sheer excess of Earth humans and their degenerate machinations, to which the already global and soon overwhelming climate change with its worldwide destructive consequences will belong in the worst wise. The USA will be primarily responsible for this and will bear full blame for it, namely through its criminal and irresponsible first atomic test and the two atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Although the Nazi regime in Nazi Germany had already made the first secret, but not entirely useless attempts at a nuclear base, it was only America that was really successful and was able to win the war with it, which meant that various states on Earth could also get hold of the atomic formula and from then on pose a great danger of a possible worldwide nuclear war and trigger an enormous catastrophe. These irresponsible crimes committed against the planet, nature, the climate, fauna and flora, and against Earth humans will now, from the coming month of December, lead to the first drastic and momentous consequences in terms of a very rapid and unstoppable global climate. Change that will have very adverse effects on all aspects of life, and that can never be reversed. So in 8 months' time, the climate change, which will become more and more widespread and noticeable from now on, will announce itself irrevocably, leading to ever more severe natural disasters over the next 2,500 years, which will cause unprecedented human suffering and misery as well as destruction, particularly through global storms and massive rainfall, which will cause widespread, devastating floods in Europe and around the world. But what will now result from the American atomic crime on a large scale on the planet, on all of humanity, on nature, fauna and flora, on the atmosphere and on the climate, will now all take its destructive course. Consequently, the first very severe climate changes are imminent, which will become apparent from the coming month of December, but will only break out in about 80 years. So it will come as it must inevitably come, namely that in the coming month of December, the whole of Central Europe will be hit by an unusual cold wave of up to minus 30 degrees Celsius, which will also take hold of England and lead to the death of a large number of human beings from frostbite, and will only end in the middle of March next year, that is in 1947. But the coming extreme weather conditions will be even more far-reaching and will last until 1948, bringing much hardship, suffering, and misery to human beings in other countries as well, especially after the turn of the millennium, and indeed well into the third millennium in the future. And this will inevitably also be the case with the impending cold winter, which from next year will be referred to as the hunger winter, and will also be linked to the food crisis that began at the beginning of this year. This will claim the lives of several 100,000 human beings in Europe, which will also spread to the Soviet Union and claim the lives of more than 2.4 million human beings there, as well as unavoidable dire consequences in other countries. However, when the cold spell comes to an end in March next year, a major heat wave will begin and continue throughout Europe until the end of September, without a single drop of rain falling. This will be recorded in the annals as the steppe summer of 1947. And this will happen again and again for a long time into the third millennium, because the Earth humans, who are becoming more and more excessive in number, are flooding the planet Earth, the whole world and its natural ecosystems through destructive machinations, and thus continue to irresponsibly cause and advance climate change, as they also increasingly drive the impairment of all life in nature and its fauna and flora. Depending on the location and area, temperatures in the world will occasionally reach between 39.5 degrees Celsius in the shade and 47 or even over 50 degrees Celsius in the sun, causing certain fruit trees to flower twice and bear small fruit. And all this will continue well into the third millennium. Fields, vegetable gardens, and meadows will dry up next year, as will small lakes and streams, and large lakes and rivers will also have very low water levels. And because rainwater will be missing everywhere next year, a lot of livestock will have to be slaughtered across Europe as a result of the lack of rain, because no more fodder will grow for the animals. There will also be a lack of water in nature, where animals will die of thirst. And so 2 years after the last World War, there will be great hardship all around, with human beings in certain areas suffering from hunger, which will be exacerbated by the extreme heat. And because there will be no rain at all in many places next year, and in many places there will be no water at all, the prospects for the harvest will be poor, because the days will be hot and sunny and no plants will grow. And because no rain will fall, the farmers will also not be able to sow the next seed. Consequently, there will be no great harvest, and then there will be a great shortage of certain foodstuffs. However, the whole issue of the cold spell and heat wave is trivialized by meteorologists, climate researchers, certain other scientists, and the population, and attributed to natural weather changes, but not to climate change, because all meteorologists and all scientists as a whole are still unaware of this and therefore do not worry about it, but simply attribute it to the natural course of nature. It will therefore be claimed for a long time, well into the first years of the new millennium, that these are natural changing weather processes that occur from time to time. Consequently, during the following decades, neither learned scientists nor simple humanity itself will worry about the real causes. All know-it-alls, however, will contradict the facts without reason, that everything is due to the degenerating and irresponsible machinations of the Earth humans, who are overpopulating the Earth, and who are destroying everything with their destructive excesses and machinations, and who are to blame for the fact that everything in nature, the climate and the atmosphere, is changing so negatively. But everything will be so interrelated that it will spread more and more and begin to run rampant.
Here are examples that relate to the themes of plastic invention: environmental degradation, climate change denial, and the far-reaching consequences of human activities on the planet, as highlighted in the text. 1. Invention of plastic and its environmental impact. The text mentions the invention of plastic and its global environmental impact. While plastic wasn't invented in 1531, the first synthetic plastic, bakelite, was created in 1907 by Belgian chemist Leo Baekeland. Since then, plastic production has exploded, with millions of tons produced annually. The invention of plastics was initially seen as a marvel of modern science, offering cheap and durable materials for a wide range of uses. However, plastic waste has since become a massive environmental problem. Today, plastics are found not only in landfills, but also in the deepest parts of the ocean, on mountaintops like Mount Everest, and even in the air we breathe. This pollution has contributed to environmental destruction, impacting wildlife, ecosystems, and human health in ways that reflect the text's prediction of global catastrophe. 2. Post-war climate extremes. The Hunger Winter 1944 to 1945. The text's mention of an extreme cold spell and food crises following World War II parallels the historical Hunger Winter of 1944 to 1945, which struck the Netherlands during the German occupation. The winter was marked by an extreme cold spell and severe food shortages due to the war. People were forced to burn furniture for warmth and survive on limited food rations. The combination of harsh weather and the aftermath of the war led to the deaths of tens of thousands. This mirrors the description of a deadly cold spell in the text that leads to widespread suffering and loss of life, exacerbated by political and environmental factors. 3. The atomic bomb and its long-term consequences. The text describes the USA's atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II and their long-term effects on the planet and climate. In 1945, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs, leading to massive destruction and the deaths of over 200,000 people. The bombings not only had immediate effects on the city's populations, but also caused long-term environmental and health impacts due to radiation exposure. The bombings led to a global arms race, with many nations acquiring nuclear weapons. The legacy of these bombings has contributed to fears of nuclear war and its potential to cause irreversible damage to the planet, reflecting the text's warning of widespread destruction. 4. 1947 European heatwave and famine. The text's description of a heatwave following the cold winter is reminiscent of the heatwave of 1947, which occurred across Europe. The heatwave led to severe droughts, especially in France and the UK, and caused agricultural failures, reducing food supplies. This resulted in famine-like conditions, as many crops failed, and livestock suffered due to the lack of water. The text also highlights that these kinds of climate extremes will continue well into the third millennium, which mirrors today's reality, as heatwaves and droughts have become more frequent and severe due to climate change. 5. Denial of climate change by meteorologists and scientists. In the text, meteorologists and scientists deny the reality of climate change and attribute extreme weather events to natural causes. This parallels the historical denial and skepticism around climate change, particularly in the late 20th century. For decades, many scientists and politicians dismissed the idea of human-induced climate change, claiming that extreme weather patterns were natural fluctuations. Organizations like ExxonMobil famously funded campaigns that cast doubt on climate science, delaying meaningful action on climate change. Despite overwhelming evidence, climate denialism persisted into the 21st century. As seen in political opposition to climate policies in countries like the U.S., this reflects the long-standing denial of climate science, even as the effects become increasingly visible. 6. Post-war food crisis and agricultural failures. The text predicts agricultural failures due to extreme weather conditions, leading to food shortages. Historically, this mirrors the post-World War II food crisis, where Europe faced food shortages due to war damage, droughts, and failing economies. Many countries experienced significant reductions in crop yields, and the war had disrupted global food supply chains. In countries like the Soviet Union, the post-war period saw famines, particularly the Soviet famine of 1946 to 1947, which led to the deaths of millions. This aligns with the text's mention of widespread hunger, livestock deaths, and poor harvests caused by changing climate conditions. 7. Rising global temperatures and unprecedented heat waves. The text describes temperatures rising to 50 degrees Celsius in certain areas. This is not far from the truth, as heat waves have become more intense in recent years. For example, in 2019, parts of Europe experienced record-breaking temperatures, with parts of France reaching 46 degrees Celsius (115 degrees Fahrenheit). The Middle East and parts of South Asia have seen temperatures soar to nearly 50 degrees Celsius, making outdoor activities dangerous for human health. These extreme temperatures have caused wildfires, crop failures, and water shortages. In 2021, the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. experienced an unprecedented heat dome, with temperatures reaching 49 degrees Celsius (121 degrees Fahrenheit) in Canada. These rising temperatures align with the text's prediction of extreme heat events and their devastating consequences on agriculture, human health, and ecosystems. 8. Ongoing population growth and environmental degradation. The text points to overpopulation as one of the main drivers of environmental destruction. Today, human overpopulation continues to strain the Earth's resources, leading to deforestation, pollution, and climate change. The global population has surged from around 2.5 billion in 1950 to over 7.8 billion today. This exponential growth has increased demand for food, water, and energy, further exacerbating the environmental crisis. Deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, for example, has accelerated to meet the demands of agriculture, particularly for soybeans and cattle grazing. This deforestation contributes to climate change by reducing the planet's ability to absorb carbon dioxide. The text's warnings about overpopulation's role in environmental collapse are thus closely mirrored by today's global environmental challenges. 9. Casein plastic. The reference to plastic made from casein, a protein found in milk, points to the historical development of early plastics. In the early 1900s, casein plastics, often called galolith, were developed as a biodegradable alternative to synthetic plastics. Galolith was commonly used to make buttons, jewelry, and other small items. However, it did not become as widespread as synthetic plastics like polyethylene and polystyrene, which dominated production due to their durability and low cost. Despite early alternatives, the mass production of synthetic plastics has become a major environmental issue, with casein plastic now representing only a historical footnote in the evolution of materials. 10. The role of the USA in environmental destruction. The text singles out the USA as playing a significant role in the environmental crisis, particularly due to its early atomic tests and industrial development. Historically, the USA has been one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, which drive climate change. The country's industrial boom, reliance on fossil fuels, and later development of the military-industrial complex have had far-reaching environmental consequences. While the USA has made strides in environmental protection, such as through the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, it remains one of the largest polluters globally, contributing significantly to the carbon emissions that drive global warming, These examples illustrate how real historical events and modern challenges align with the themes of the text, including the environmental and human consequences of technological advancements, overpopulation, and the long-term impacts of climate change.